it's very hard for us to find out very much about 3 generations back. Maybe they had lots of journals, maybe you could find some little bits here and there, but go 4, 5, 6 generations, there's nothing. But a lot of us would like to know, if we had the opportunity to interact with them and learn from them and just talk to them and find out who they are. Just having something that is extended out as a version of you that can interact with people should they want to is ultimately a nice option to have.
Hello, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. I've been thinking that you'd make a great guest for the Augmented Life since I first met you and started learning not just about Sensay and the business that you've been building, but also how you've been building it. So happy to dig into some of those details. To kick us off, I was thinking back to the first time that we spoke. I was impressed to learn about the ways in which the human connections that you're creating between an AI personality and people was also reflected in the ways that you were pursuing human connection with your team. I think you were all in, or a large number of you were in Thailand the first time we spoke. How has running a team that's totally global actually influenced your thinking about enduring human connection, and how do you build those insights into your AI product?
No, it's fascinating, right? Human connection has taken so many shifts over the past, God knows how, millennia, I guess. We've moved from small tribes and small communities, historically, to large cities a few thousand years ago at least. But a lot of the communication before history was done, obviously one-to-one in small tribes and sort of person to person. Then comes along the idea of messengers, followed swiftly by mail and with the advent of writing, so communication tools that way, and writing takes a big step to go that much further. Then, obviously, with the advent of telephones, you end up with this ability to communicate with each other, over great distances. And suddenly, with mobile, you actually end up with the ability for anyone to reach you anywhere, anytime, and which is then kind of pushed to a whole other level with smartphones and social media, enabling you to sort of broadcast yourself to many people at the same time. And then with, combining all that with remote work, there's this abundance of noise and communication that is almost, it's drowning us. There's just so much there, so many messages popping up all the time. Is it possible to sort of keep up with a lot of the stuff that goes on? And remote work is an extreme version of that as well, right? People think, they're just on south of the beach somewhere and having a lovely time. Sometimes may very well be the case, but a lot of the time, you end up with different communities, different things that you just kind of stay on top of, and so it comes with a bit of practice and determination. I mean, I've been doing that way of working for 4.5 years now. And so for me, it's become normal, right? Finding the time and discipline to get my head down and do the work when I need to, and, operate with people who have a similar mentality, who are in different time zones and around the world, and, finding the balance between your work life and personal time to switch off, while not getting too sort of swamped with all that messaging. And that's kind of where we get to with the stage of AI messaging, and actually the ability to help reduce down the number of messages by essentially summarizing or condensing, or having the tools there that help you filter through the noise to focus on the things that you really want to engage with. And so, yeah, I mean, when it comes to building a remote team, a remote company, it's probably not the easiest thing in the world. There are times where we do, think, should we have an office and stay in one place? But there is a big sort of quality of life boost to actually, being able to hire remote people, being able to move around ourselves, and being able to access global talent in an age where we are very fortunate to have the ability to be globally connected, to get in touch with anyone on different time zones and include them in your team, whether that's for efficiency or quality of team, whether that's just for specialists in a particular area, or whether it's just throwing the net a bit wider to find people who really believe in the mission and want to be a part of the project and team. And so for us, it's it's definitely a modern way of working. It's for us, we do make the most of it, and we've got a really quality team who do ship products and then get things done. And it's a lovely sort of company culture to be around when you kind of get it right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One thing that struck me listening to you describe the evolution of human communication is that one-to-one or in-person communication feels spontaneous, right? And therefore more authentic. Whereas, when we pass through a period of human civilization heavily featuring letter writing, traveling slowly, there's something about the practice of letter writing that feels more thoughtful. Obviously, it's asynchronous. So when you're practicing those asynchronous communication modes, you, I think, are putting more effort into exactly what it is that you're putting into words. And it struck me that Sensay is building an interesting combination of both, in that when I'm training my digital avatar, I'm actually thinking very thoughtfully, what is it that I want to upload to Sensay? What do I want to teach the model in order for it to then interact with the world in a way that feels very real time, therefore very spontaneous, which is actually a really unusual combination. Like those two things don't ordinarily intersect. That's wild. How long have you been building that, and where are you at with bringing it to the world?
Yeah, so no, it's a fascinating thought. So this whole notion of the evolution of connection and communication is actually something we've only been talking about fairly recently in terms of way of explaining this as an evolution. So yeah, it goes from one to one slowly but over distance, to instantly over distance, to being able to have anyone reach the one person. And then suddenly, with the ability to create AI versions of yourself with Sensay and create your digital replica, suddenly, it's the many of you that can reach the many of everyone, but on that one-to-one basis. And you're right, maybe there's more thought that goes into the individual. Maybe that's just our perception. And this does kind of come into one of the larger philosophical aspects of what we do, which I enjoy. I studied philosophy at university and wrote 2 philosophical books based on this exact technology years ago, which is kind of how we ended up into Sensay. But the philosophy of identity of who we are and what makes us us is so nuanced, but not just because of like our individuality, but because of even ourselves. We have an idea of who we are, which is usually different to different people and different in the media that we communicate. So you might be one version of yourself on Twitter, which might be completely different to the version of yourself that you put out on Instagram, which is completely different to the way that you interact on a podcast, to completely different to how you interact with your partner, your kids, your parents. And maybe you just have a particularly bad day or a few bad days in a row. So someone you maybe interact with 3 days in a row maybe thinks you're a completely different person, and maybe a bad person. So there's your version of yourself. There's the version you put out to other people in certain contexts, and then there's the version of the version of you that other people view. And usually a lot of that doesn't align, but together you can kind of create this kind of nuanced version of yourself, depending with some context of who you're speaking to. But all in all, fundamentally, and this is where it does get a little bit sad for our own evolution, we're not overly complicated as beings. If you took the entire lifespan of someone from 1 to 80 and let's say you extracted everything they'd ever said, written, typed, text, spoken, recorded, over those, let's say, from the age of 15 to, I don't know, 75, over those 60 years, you could actually reduce that entire amount of text to, I think it's around like 18 gigabytes of actual like text information. Then reducing that down, because there'll be lots of repeated stories, lots of, simple conversations. Hey, how are you? Hello, I'm Dan, and so forth. Reducing that down to maybe 1 gigabyte to like incorporate someone's entire like life story of every relevant piece of information they've ever said throughout their entire life is very small, relatively speaking, right? So when we're talking about the sort of nuances of personality and how to capture that and how that sort of would interact with the world and what we would like that to be, and the thoughtfulness we would want it behind there are some controls we can put in to sort of say, oh, I would like to be friendly with everyone, and maybe that's the same as the way you are over email or professional interactions as compared to, I don't know, your friends down the pub. So, we already have that in our day-to-day lives. So having a replica that is used in a similar way, that has certain contextual information and inputs, which has mostly come from your previous interactions. So usually it's going to be in a digital format that you're going to be using it. It's going to have some digital data footprints that it can follow and sort of find the pattern in those to essentially replicate that pattern in that situation for you. So even though you might see like an email be drafted by your replica and say, hang on a minute, that doesn't sound like me. But then if you looked back at all your previous emails, it might be exactly how you sound. But sometimes our version of ourselves that we think of ourselves isn't always the version that goes out. So it's a fascinating sort of like web of identity that we're sort of uncovering about ourselves and humanity and individualism that we have to kind of take apart and put back together in an AI version of someone.
Right. Well, here's something that really excites me about the next decade, and it goes directly to the heart of these questions of identity and what you are. I think that we all go through life experiencing adaptability and we're shaped by our experience. But it feels as if the experience happens first and the shaping happens as a consequence of those experiences, as opposed to a very deliberate process. Like the deliberate process of making a Sensay replica is one that sure can be trained on the emails, the books, the papers, whatever I've written. But after that training period, there's something that can be more deliberate. Like I can tell my replica exactly how I want it to behave. And weirdly, we're standing at the dawn of more deliberate self-crafting, I think, as human beings. I'm seeing an explosion of interest in the neuroplasticity that comes from psychedelics and pairing heroic doses of psychedelics, which seem to increase neuroplasticity, with follow-up training, integration sessions, they're often termed, that are designed to take advantage of that momentary increase in neuroplasticity to rewire the brain. And it's not just about drugs. You also see more interest in the different kinds of neural states that can be attained via meditation. I think that Vipassana meditation has been interesting to the West now for decades, but we're starting to see, just coming this decade, a renewed interest in ancient techniques like the jhanas, which do seem to have a bigger effect on cognitive rewiring. So maybe the way this plays out is that people are going to be able to think through and even test more deliberate designs of their selves first with AI replicas, and then you could set out on a deliberate path to literally become the person that you want to be, from the deep neural net you make in a computer to the wetware deep neural net, and then a deliberate path of rewiring. I think this is going to be an awesome coming decade for humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely truth in all of that, by the way. I mean, you look at myself, right? I never had Instagram until I went nomadic. And I became better at taking photos. And then I started, finding better places to take photos, and then started, started adapting more to the lifestyle to take those epic photos. And I had enjoyed that previously, but it'd be like, I'd go on an adventure once a month, and then suddenly it was like every other day, find the adventure. And that went on for maybe like 3 years until I realized how, there was two big realizations. First of all, obviously it was amazing that I'd become that person, that I'd kind of like rewired myself to be more active and more adventurous. But they then went a bit too far. I found myself being, despite literally traveling while working, going to all of the most incredible places on the planet, literally everyone's bucket list destinations. I found myself being jealous of other people traveling. And I was like, this is ridiculous, and this is the toxicity of it. But also, I then injured myself for the sake of a photo, and I was like, this is. I know there are some crazy statistics out there about the amount of deaths because of selfies out there, and it's crazy. But no, I injured my ankle for literally a photo, and I was just like, right, I'm done with this. So I still adventure, but now I do it for me rather than for the photos. And so I still take the photos, but they don't get posted, which means none of that kind of pressure gets mounted up. But when it comes to your replica, I guess there might be it's really funny. I hadn't really thought about it in that context before, whether someone would create and adjust their replica to be a certain way so that the perception of them would be that, and then in the hope that they might be able to, aspire to be that themselves. It's genuinely an interesting one. I think that the biggest disparity between replicas and the real version of someone will be, I guess, intelligence levels. Obviously, replicas will have vastly more information available to them than the individual would themselves specifically, which is probably one of the more difficult things we have to try and overcome. Like how do you limit how do you nicely limit a huge amount of data in an LLM AI agent to only limit them to a certain amount of information when it could be helpful to actually have them access a bit more, especially when we already have smartphones that are essentially brain extensions anyway. As soon as we all have the answers to everything at our fingertips 24/7, right? So, where do we really limit our own intelligence when we have that tool available to us at all times? But no, I love the idea that replicas can be our best selves, that they can be out there. I mean, our CTO Marco is constantly telling me how he loves talking to my replica because my replica is much nicer than I am to him. So we're old friends. It's always kind of like jokey stuff. He's like, Danbot's not mean to me, and he doesn't make fun of me or make jokes about Italian food. So there's definitely an aspect of like there are still differences, and there will be, and maybe there's some things that people prefer over replicas or prefer over the real person for that fact. But we see it as a really useful tool to not just capture someone's knowledge, experience, skills, share them with people around them, or beyond, like share them globally 24/7 in any language. I mean, I speak 3 languages, but Danbot can speak 100, right? It's amazing. So it means I'm not limited by my language anymore to communicate with certain people in certain places. But beyond that, there's the ability for them to actually sort of even start generating new knowledge, not just for themselves, but for people around me, right? Being able to like almost bounce information. Like one of our team uses Danbot for like help with, because I've got a background setting up restaurants and bars as well. And so the sort of food level of understanding and the training and knowledge around how to find like good restaurants and bars is all in there from my own experience. And one of our team just uses it for that. So he's now learning from that, and it's amazing to see that actually help to generate sort of new knowledge and understanding with someone.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it sounds like you have brought, there is a through line here where you've brought your adventurous self to the process of building a company with the global team. How often, just thinking tactically for a moment, how often do you bring the team together in one physical place to create the synchronous communication opportunities?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, when it comes to, I mean, thank you for saying it's adventurous. I think anyone who starts their own company is mad. Um, it's, I think it's definitely more on the madness side than the adventurous side. Um, but in terms of, yeah, I think, I'm constantly on the move. I enjoy moving around. I think I can't be in one place for too long. There's still so many. The sort of curse of travel is that the more you see, the more you realize there is to see. Um, and so all instead of the 100 countries I've been to, all I can think about is the 150 odd that I haven't, and it's which is again is a crazy way to think. So when it comes to meeting up with team, a few of us are nomadic, and being a part of this global ecosystem and this technology that is changing lives on a global scale. There are places that sometimes we need to be. There are different events that we should be at, different sort of people we should be meeting, and different showcases we need to be at. Sometimes it is just a case of moving around to see someone. So the reason we're in Italy at the moment is because our CTO is Italian and from here. So we came to spend some time with him so that we could, work together. We were all in Thailand together because two of our founding team were in Thailand. But being in Italy, we realized that quite a few of our developers came from Italy. So we arranged originally a meetup for, 4 or 5 of us. And then it ended up being, all the developers wanted to come, obviously. So they sort of, we all sorted their flights. They came in, we got together for a couple of days, and it's nice. It's good team building. It's good to sort of like have that engagement and, have the discussions that you don't always have while working remotely. But arguably also wouldn't have if you were all in the office every single day. So it is that kind of change of pace that really, it's easy to sort of reflect and say, oh, well, we've had a really productive 2 days, so we should always be in an office together. I don't think that's the case, because I think as soon as you're in an office all together, there are different things that creep in, different sort of like, comforts that come by. But because it was a focus for a couple of days, they came in, we knew we had to do this, 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 and this by the end of the 2 days. And we made it fun. We made it exciting. They got to hang out with each other. We split everyone up into teams, and it worked amazingly. But do I think they would have that level of productivity if they were in an office all the time? Probably not. So doing things like this, we realized we should do it more, but having that sort of difference in speed, that change of pace, really, and the sort of places and times to work towards, does make it a bit more fun. So in terms of how to decide, sometimes if it's just convenient, like we will try and see team members, right? So if I'm, a month ago I was in Gothenburg in Sweden for a TEDx talk, and I realized that one of our community managers is in the very, very north of Denmark. So I just took a boat over to go see him and bring in some Sensay goodies. And right, so sometimes it's nice like that and it's convenient. And if other team members are moving around, then sometimes we'll always let everyone know where everyone is and say, oh, you should meet up with so and so. But planned wise, every couple of months, we just think of somewhere that's going to be convenient for people. Not everyone on the team has to come. That's the sort of easiest part of it. These whole company wide offsites where they're, everyone's talking about it for ages, trying to plan it, I think are probably too much, because I'm not sure that much gets done of them. Maybe they're a bit of fun, there's a celebration and there's a bit of team building in that. But I feel like you can kind of do the same just through smaller focused events around certain things, and everyone kind of gets to know each other eventually over time. And it's just part of the evolution. We did, funny enough, we did actually have this idea for a nomadic company. Over the last couple of months, I was thinking about this. What if you could actually, especially on a small team, and with AI coming through now, and especially with AI workers coming into the space and AI developers, teams are going to get smaller and smaller. We're working our way towards super small, efficient teams using a lot of AI help to create some really neat products. But what if with those small teams, you could create a nomadic company where your, 10 to 50 team members are literally every 3 months just ups and goes to somewhere where they are allowed to work from for 3 months, where they get the visa to work from, and you take over a small area like somewhere, and all work together from there and do all the activities and do all the fun nomadic stuff, but all kind of together, and you create this really sort of amazing nomadic company culture. But logistically, it's a nightmare. So we've quickly got rid of that idea. But I think for a smaller, younger team, I think that absolutely they get away with it. And I think that we'll probably see a few stories about that in the next few years as well.
I am delighted to hear this. My co-founders and I at White Ops had the same idea, even on the same timescale. We in the early days, we thought there might be a real geographic component to customer acquisition. So we really sketched out this plan where we would, find an Airbnb, available multi-month, let's say 3 or 4 months at a time, and just slowly circumnavigate the globe. We set up home base, then from home base, go out and sell, and build new developer connections, new partnership connections, and then move on. And we would just have moving global HQ. It turned out that the dynamics of that business were more rooted in place. It was a good business to start in New York. Quite a bit of concentration in customers in New York. So that just proved to be not the business for that model. But I'm still really enthusiastic about the model. Like it does seem like it could be fun and even a competitive advantage.
And it's just as cost effective as well. I mean, if you don't have to be in a time zone or a certain place, or in a concentration of people where it makes sense to be networking the whole time, literally for the same price as, I guess, one apartment for one of us in London, New York, or Singapore, any good central hub, we had 3 months in a villa in Thailand with like 4 or 5 of us all together, just heads down, because then you create the conversations, you pressure test the relationships, but you also, you create the conversations and speed, and you're just always around each other to have the quick conversations. But, instead of a tiny 1-bedroom apartment for the literally same price as that for one person, you can have it for like per month, the same price, you have a large villa somewhere where you can all be there, and it's a much more comfortable space, much more like much more luxurious and nice. And it's just a really like cost-effective way of doing this, without the additional cost of things like, London transport, like having an office space or even just the hot desk, and cost beyond that, cost of living and everything else. So there's definitely a huge like geo arbitrage to be made from being able to do that if you can.
Right. I just love that, and it's you're reaching a radical place by rethinking some business norms. And it's not just about changing the norm. It's actually about finding new forms of leverage or efficiency by hitting those sliders. Like why do we have to do it this way? What are the opportunities when we do it otherwise? What are other ways in which you think you've broken the rules or the conventions with Sensay that you really think have paid off and other entrepreneurs should consider?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one that comes to mind is that the way we essentially self fundraised, right? So
tell me everything.
So we, for the first, so I've had this idea in the back of my mind for Sensay arguably most of my adult life. I even studied philosophy. I was always, always loved the philosophy of identity and existentialism.
I hear that a lot from AI entrepreneurs, by the way, like a lot. Like it's a major theme. Like this is what I wanted to do when I was a kid.
There's a lot of introspection around this kind of stuff for sure. Because I think at some point you just have to accept that there's a very high chance that we ourselves are not real, and there's kind of like a real sort of mental jump at that point where you're kind of like, even if we're not, then it's a worthy cause to pursue. Rather than just sitting around getting drunk and high, which is anyway. So we even along the way, I had obviously lots of life experience, lots of adventures, and lots of it kind of all came together. And there was a time where I had even, lost my memory for a few days because of a concussion I had, and facing my own mortality on at least at least a few occasions, it means that the whole like identity and the sort of search for kind of meaning of life really hit me super young. And so I ended up exploring that a lot in my sort of mid 20s, and ended up writing a couple of books around my personal search for meaning in an existence where I don't believe in any deity or afterlife. And so for me, I ended up writing these two books based around digital immortality and mind uploading, and how we are extremely lucky, generation to be alive, because we have so much data about us. We live in this golden age of we can be anyone we want to be. We can go anywhere we want to go, almost, far more than anyone has ever had in their history, and we just won't necessarily be forgotten entirely in a few generations, because the data about us will survive. There'll be photos and videos and text from us that we'll be able to, read for future generations. So the whole idea has been with me for a while. And so when it came at the time to start building this out, when, I basically had to, self-fund our initial development and bootstrap it to a certain stage, which is like a lot of like sort of early founders when they're in that stage. And then, like most founders, you go through a stage of, hang on a minute, we might need some money here to, help build this in the way we want to. And so then you're faced with the age old, like, oh, do we go to angel investors? Do we friends and family? Do we crowdfund? What are the sort of options available to someone when they're looking for that kind of like cash to help them build this out? Especially, if you want to build something the right way. And that's where we did change, flip the script a little bit. So a few of us that come from a Web3 background. So instead of, going down the typical sort of VC route and looking for sort of, pre-seed funding or an angel, we decided to actually do a token sale. And so this token sale, when we had the experience on it, I wouldn't recommend this for everyone to try and do, but it is definitely something that people should consider and look at as a genuine way of like funding businesses, because it gives you this opportunity to address an entire market that is, very liquid and cash heavy. Comes with its own risks, but it's when we did a public sale of a token, we enabled a functionality of Web3 that we always had planned anyway, to enable people to essentially be a part of that sort of journey with us. So by buying the token in a public sale, it actually enabled us to essentially generate these tokens, sell them off to people who are participating. We ended up raising $3.5 million that way, which is far more than we had even targeted, and definitely far more than we would have got from any sort of VC coming in. And because of the mechanics and the tokenomics and the way we set it up, it meant that everyone sort of had their vesting period very quickly. So it meant that any kind of not any obligation, because obviously we're still committed to what we're doing and will be, but it meant that there was no one still like waiting for their tokens to come out, and we didn't go to any VCs in that route either. We didn't do any sort of like influencers or anything like that. We just built it all through like sort of blood, sweat, and tears and connections and just reaching out. So it meant that we basically ended up having to self-fund as essentially a form of self-funding without having sort of anyone breathing down our neck or forcing us to move at a certain speed or a certain direction that they were motivated to push us down. And it's given us a lot of breathing space to test out a few different options, make some small pivots here and there, and really develop the technology, in the way that we want to, and the way that we feel that we should, which is very rare for a lot of companies at this kind of stage to be comfortable in their cash position without having, anyone sort of like, that they have to be accountable to, at the same time as, building something new and innovative and never done before, while they have the freedom to sort of actually explore that a bit, while building out like a great team. All these things, just and even having additional tokens on top of the funds raised, still have as a marketing budget and actually be able to use that as well. So there's a huge amount of benefit of doing this that we're extremely privileged to have done well with, and are in a very lucky position. But it's not a normal route by any stretch of the imagination.
Right, right. That's fantastic. I remember, just as a nerd, cybersecurity nerd in particular, I was really enthusiastic about the use of NFTs as I saw interest in that exploding as access tokens, right? Let's take advantage of the non-fungibility of those non-fungible tokens to use them in various authentication scenarios, especially physical authentication. I thought would be a really interesting use case. So I was quite surprised to see the tech being applied to so much art. And it occurs to me that the creation of your own AI replica can be considered indeed like an artistic act. How do you see that coming together in the future? Is there what is the further crossover?
Do you know what, you've actually hit on a really great application for this and blockchain and the way it goes. So even years ago when I wrote those first books, it's early days Bitcoin. Even then, I identified blockchain as being an important part of how replicas will interact with the world. Because when you have one good quality replica of you, there's no reason you couldn't have thousands, millions, maybe some of them maybe not controlled by you, some of them controlled by other people, pretend using your replica to act as you. So at some point you need some kind of verification in there, and blockchain actually solves a lot of that with verified, authenticated transactions and interactions, especially when your AI replica becomes more autonomous as it starts to have some agency and do things for you. And so there's two elements to the blockchain NFT aspect of this. So obviously with the actions of your replica, so say you wanted it to, pay your bills or do something for you, write a message or that, interact with anyone online as we do, there has to be some kind of like verification chain or verifiable method for checking to see that replica is attached to you, which then itself requires obviously some KYC or some kind of proof of humanity for yourself, and that will all tie into your replica's actions. But then you're right, then there are some replicas that I might own my replica, but let's say it is out there and my replica is selling a course on how to do a token sale, right? It's using my knowledge to interact with people, and maybe it has its own sort of monthly regular income from that, which makes my replica then valuable. So the ability to mint your replica as an NFT so that it can then be traded to someone else, so you can prove that replica was created by you because of the proof of humanity, is mintable, connected to you, and then transferable to someone else, becomes relatively important. Not so much while someone's alive, because it's a bit weird if someone's alive and their replica gets transferred, then it's kind of like, well, your replica is now owned by someone else, but you're still you. Can you create another replica? How does that work? But when someone sort of passes away, I use Elvis as a good example for this, still, countless Elvis fans out there around the world. But if Elvis's replica was there, minted as an NFT that could be bought and sold because it was earning money, because it was licensed out to all these different Elvis fan clubs and used to interact with around the world, that has obvious value. So the Elvis estate might lose some money at some point and might think, oh, do you know what? We could sell the official Elvis replica to its biggest fan. And then any income, any sort of ownership of that replica, that sort of monetary income from that replica would then be transferred over to the new owner of the NFT, and the NFT will be used as a vehicle to facilitate that. So yeah, I completely agree. It's in the longer term plans for us. It's not something that's going to come out too soon, but it's definitely one of the better applications of Web3 tech into replication tech.
I agree. That the history of civilization shows us that the longest lived things that maintain vitality are organizations. Businesses can last for centuries. Human beings cannot last for centuries. Buildings can last for centuries, but I put it to you that they're not self-improving. they're dead. They can remain in a static state for a long time. We have ancient monuments, of course, but we also live with vital organizations that are centuries old, and those are institutional in some way. Sometimes it's institutionalized religion, sometimes it's actual businesses, and I think that's a killer, right? This is a killer application for smart contracts. Like there are indeed ways in which I would like to extend some of my intentions farther than a human lifespan. And do I have to create an entire foundation to make that happen? Not always. Some of my goals are small. They just want to operate on a time scale of a couple centuries. And so knowing that there is some way to mint something that has that survivability property and can make essentially commitments that I can put into code in the form of a smart contract sounds really appealing to me.
Yeah, so this was, I mean, we talk about replicas as the obvious one is, after you die, your replica will persist and be able to interact with your kids, your family as an education tool, as something that, right now it's very hard for us to find out very much about 3 generations back. Maybe they had lots of journals. Maybe you could find some little bits here and there, but go 4, 5, 6 generations, there's nothing. But a lot of us would like to know, if we had the opportunity to interact with them and learn from them and just talk to them and find out who they are. And that's coming from British and North American sort of cultures, right? But there are other cultures that just have this huge connection to their ancestry in a way that they, deeply treasure that and would love to be able to interact with their ancestors in that kind of sense. But in terms of you kind of programming your replica to act on your behalf afterwards, that's also the flip side of it, because if we die, if we, let's say, you don't like or trust your kids to manage your assets after you die, there's every opportunity that, with replicas that have some kind of autonomy and have, whether it's through smart contracts or just programmed into their AI, would be able to fulfill those desires for you, whether it's accumulate more assets, manage your assets, whether it's distribute your assets or achieve some kind of loftier goal over that course, or whether it is just to kind of extend yourself and explore and be available forever should someone want to interact with it. And it does really kind of bring up the question of, if you could live forever, how long would you want to? And that's always a difficult question, because especially when it comes to lots of religions and the concept of afterlives, and the word forever and eternity gets thrown around a lot. People often don't really think about what that means, because even in most literary references to any kind of immortal being, it's very rare that you get something that's over 10,000 years old, because people just, we can't even theorize what that would be like. Because I mean, hey, I'm in my 30s. I already forget a lot of things that I do day to day. Got what, another 1,000 years? That's just 1,000 years. What does it matter if I live 1,000 years if I forget 60% of it, because my brain has only got so much capacity for memories. And so the contemplation of actually living for a certain amount of time becomes very, very difficult, because you just can't think of it. But having something that is extended out as a version of you that can interact with people should they want to is ultimately a nice option to have. Some people just, they're very content with their life and would say, okay, 50, 60, 70, 80 years is enough, and that's it. That's not me though. I would like it. Yeah.
I'll share with you my digital afterlife goal. It starts with cookies. I have some recipe notes from family members now long past. And what form do they take? They take handwritten notes. It's words and numbers. And one of my goals with my Fulcra data store is to collect not just the things I've written, but the facts of how I'm living my life, what I'm spending my time on, where I go, every biometric that I can get my hands on, to capture a bunch of procedural knowledge. Like, how do I live? What are my modes of living? I'm trying to capture that procedural knowledge so that I can help some descendants of mine bake cookies. I'm particularly proud of my gluten-free almond flour cookies. And I don't want to just leave that behind in words. I think there's a way to capture my procedural knowledge in a model so that in the future, kitchens of the future, I imagine, are going to be pretty tech enabled. There's got to be some way in which I can guide a 8-year-old through cooking cookies just the way I did. And that's what I'm going for, right? The feeling of being a guiding presence, I think, is a fantasy worth working towards.
Yeah, but it's even that, right? It's even the what you wanted to share with them, and let's say they wanted to get to know you, and the first thing your AI says is, I'm here to teach my great grandkids or future generations how to make the best cookie I've ever tried, or these ancient recipes that I found that we should be trying, experiencing, and understanding how they used to take and how we used to make them. It's part of it. That's the same sort of time capsule idea, but in a way that we can have that connection, have that interaction with them, and that's what's so powerful about it.
That's fabulous. I'm looking forward to being a part of building a future like that, along with entrepreneurs like you. Tell us before we wrap up. Those that are interested in Sensay, interested in you personally, and your books, how do we find you?
Yeah, so Sensay is sensay.io. That's SENSAY. I think I've got it here. But on all social media, you can find me at Sensay Dan, and the Sensay main account is Ask Sensay. But by all means, anyone who's interested should check us out. Go try and start creating a replica for free, and start preserving their knowledge, their experiences for future generations. Right now, we have more of a utility focus for you to have it right now as an extension of yourself, not just for future generations, but as literally like a perfect personal helper. Let's say pre-drafting your emails, like replying to people while you're on podcasts. My replica is making sure that none of my friends or family are blocked by waiting for a message back from me. So there's plenty of utility that replicas can have for you as literally a second you, as like having a sort of a second team. It's having a personal assistant for everyone at a very, very reasonable price for that kind of quality of service. And it really is this like amazing tech. Like the first time some people ever saw mobile phones, it really feels like that again. Having the superpower of your replica doing all this stuff for you is incredible.
Thanks for building that and offering it to the world. And thanks for joining me today on The Augmented Life.
Thanks so much for having me.